Pas de soleil, 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 pas de soleil.
Before we get started, we just want to say thank you to Viltrox for sending us the lens for review. But we're not paid to say anything besides our own opinions, and Viltrox does not get to see this video before it is published. By the way, you are looking at the Viltrox 50mm F1.8 lens on our Sony A7IV camera right now recording me, so if the autofocus is not doing proper things or drifting, let us know in the comment section below. Let's get straight to the point. The Viltrox 50mm F1.8 full-frame lens for Sony E mount cameras is very sharp. We tested with the Sony A7IV, which is a 33 megapixels camera, and that is definitely more demanding than the usual 24-ish megapixel sensor. But as you can see in the photo samples, this lens is super sharp when we were using it for portrait photos. You can zoom in 200% onto the photos and you will still get a lot of details. This is great especially when you are pairing it with a high megapixels camera because you won't be losing too much detail even if you want to do some cropping in post. Yes, I know some people don't like cropping, but when you are on set or doing spontaneous street photography, having the room to crop is actually very handy. By the way, all the photos you are looking at are either raw or edited in Lightroom without any sharpening. So in terms of sharpness, I'm very happy with the results. Yes, the corners can be softer than the center with the Viltrox 50mm F1.8, but for my purposes, I don't really mind. The only situation where I think people need good corner sharpness as well is for landscape photography, but usually they won't go with a 50mm lens for landscape photography though. We think testing the lens with a 33 megapixels camera is a great idea because it is kind of in the middle right now when all the companies are trying to increase the megapixel count to 50, 60, or even 100. 33 is definitely a sweet spot between image details and file sizes. Also, since the A7IV is kind of like the entry-level full-frame camera from Sony, we think most people will be interested in us testing the lens on the Sony A7IV. The second most important thing about the lens to us, or maybe many other users, is the bokeh, or the background rendition. The background blur is kind of busy on the Viltrox 50mm F1.8, and the bokeh balls have some onion rings and a bright halo around them. So if you're looking for extremely smooth and creamy bokeh, this lens might not be the best choice. When you're taking portrait photos with a busy background like trees and bushes, the background blur can be very busy and a little distracting, but that's something you need to accept for most of the budget lenses. However, it doesn't mean that it is a deal breaker for some people. A lot of people are actually looking for these imperfect bokeh by using vintage lenses. So this is definitely a very stylistic choice when you are using the Viltrox 50mm F1.8 to get the vintage look, which I'm actually a fan of. The third thing we look for in a lens is chromatic aberration control, because even though it is easy to remove in photos, it is very difficult to remove in videos. We're actually very impressed by the Viltrox lens because it doesn't have that much chromatic aberrations even in very high contrast situations with a very bright backlight source. We have seen a lot worse in other budget lenses, so we are very happy with this lens. For flaring during a real-life usage, I didn't notice too much of a problem even when I was taking photos with the sun in the back. The images stayed relatively high contrast, which is definitely a great news to us. If you're looking for a lot of lens flare, this lens doesn't produce too much of it. However, there's definitely some ghosting with this lens. They are not super bad, it is just a tiny flare with green and red color cast. I don't think that many people mind this level of ghosting unless you are doing a professional job that requires absolutely no lens flare. In those situations, I don't think you'll be using this lens and you might have better light control on set anyway. One thing I found when using this lens during our portrait photo session is the not very close minimum focus distance. I was trying to get a tighter frame with just the face of the model. I thought the camera was not focusing properly, but it was actually me getting closer than the minimum focus distance, which is very surprising. So if you're planning to get this lens for portrait photos, the closest you can get is a round head and shoulders kind of framing, so this lens will not really work for macro photography or close-ups. Also, definitely keep your lens correction settings turned on your camera because without it, there will be some very noticeable vignetting at the corners and surprisingly lens distortion at f1.8. I kind of expected the vignetting but not really the lens distortions from a 50mm lens, but they are not that hard to correct in camera or post for photos. For video, it's gonna be kind of tricky. The autofocus performance is definitely not bad at all compared to other modern day lenses. It is accurate and fast, and it works perfectly fine with the Sony A7IV autofocus system. And I'm actually running the new firmware version 1.01 on my Sony A7IV, so everything was working fine during our test. The autofocus is also working very well in videos. The focus transition is very smooth with no sudden jumps or hesitations. Pairing it with the latest focusing system on the Sony A7IV, it is almost like you have a focus puller to help you pull focus because it looks very natural and smooth. Another very good news to videographers about this lens is focus breathing. It has almost none. And I was very shocked because usually photo lenses don't really care about focus breathing, but Viltrox definitely did an amazing job making this lens with almost no focus breathing at all. For those of you who don't know what focus breathing is, when a lens changes focus from close to far or far to close, it seems like it is zooming in and out. That's focus breathing, and that is very distracting in videos. Usually only cine lenses will eliminate focus breathing, but the Viltrox 50mm F1.8 lens does it very well too. Good job. The focus motor is also pretty quiet. I don't hear any very audible focusing noise when the lens is changing its focus. You can definitely hear the lens moving if you put your ear super close to the lens like an inch away, but it is definitely not so loud that you will hear it when you're just using the lens. If you need absolute clean audio, always use an external recorder. There are some other features of the Viltrox 50mm f1.8 lens that don't really matter to us too much. You can update the firmware of the lens with the built-in USB-C port, which is much better than having to purchase a lens dock like other brands. There's also a smooth aperture ring on the lens mainly for videos, but we have never changed aperture during one scene. At least we have never done that. One thing you need to keep in mind is that the Viltrox 50mm f1.8 is not water sealed. Even though we don't use our camera in the rain anyway, it is still a little scary when small amount of rain gets onto the lens. So if you need weather sealing, this lens does not have it. That's it. This is the Viltrox 50mm f1.8 lens for Sony E mount cameras. To be honest with you, we're very impressed by the performance of this lens because it is definitely doing a much better job as a budget full-frame lens with autofocus. We are very excited to test out more lenses from Viltrox in the future. Definitely stay tuned. Even though we think 35mm will be a better choice when it comes to one lens does everything kind of situation, if you want to start doing more subject-focused photography or videography like portrait photos, this lens is a great choice to start. We love it. During the time of making this video, Viltrox is hosting a global photography contest from April 1st to May 22nd, 2022, and the prices are very good. They have cameras, lenses, gimbals, and more, so definitely check it out on the Viltrox website for more details. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. What is your favorite budget lens? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.